You ever feel the ground shake under your feet and realize it's not an earthquake? It's someone else crossing a line they were warned not to cross. The first thing that hit me wasn't the sound. It was the smell. Wet concrete and diesel fumes thick in the air before I even stepped out of my truck. Then came the vibration, low, steady, wrong. I felt it through the soles of my boots as I walked toward the bridge. My bridge. 50 feet of reinforced timber and steel brackets, built by my father 30 years ago with his own hands and a borrowed crane that barely held together. It wasn't designed for traffic. It wasn't designed for commerce. It was designed to last and to carry exactly what it was meant to carry. Nothing more. But that morning, it was carrying a fully loaded cement truck pushing close to 70,000 pounds, crawling across like it owned the place. The wooden beams groaned under the weight, a deep, strained sound I hadn't heard in my entire life. I stopped halfway down the gravel path, the crunch under my boots suddenly too loud, like I was interrupting something I shouldn't be witnessing. Another truck idled behind it, engine rumbling, exhaust hanging in the cool morning air. And right there, bolted to the entrance of the bridge, slightly tilted but still very readable, was the sign I had installed myself 5 years ago: private property, weight limit 10,000 pounds. They hadn't just ignored it. Someone had tried to unscrew it. One bolt missing. The metal plate hanging crooked like it was giving up. I could taste it then, that metallic edge of adrenaline that comes when something isn't just wrong, it's deliberate. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm a structural engineer. I've spent the last 20 years calculating load limits, stress tolerances, failure points. I know exactly what it looks like when something is being pushed past its limits. And what I was looking at wasn't an accident. The driver didn't even look at me as he eased the truck forward, inch by inch, like this was just another delivery route. Like this bridge belonged to whoever needed it most. Like the land on the other side wasn't private. Like I didn't exist. I stepped closer, hand brushing. Along the guardrail my father welded himself, the metal cold and familiar, and I felt it again. That vibration, sharper this time, a subtle shudder that ran the entire length of the structure. Not failure. Not yet. But getting there. Fast. I followed the direction the trucks were coming from, eyes tracking past the tree line until I saw it, the new development. Fresh dirt carved into what used to be untouched land. Framing going up. Concrete foundations being poured. And suddenly, it all made sense. They needed access. They needed a route heavy enough for cement trucks, steel deliveries, equipment. And instead of building their own, they took mine. Cheaper. Faster. Quiet. I didn't have to guess who they were. Laura Whitmore, HOA president. Always smiling, always talking about community growth like it was some kind of moral high ground. I'd met her twice. Both times, she spoke like decisions had already been made before the conversation even started. And standing there, watching another truck line up behind the first, I realized something that settled heavy in my chest. This wasn't a mistake they'd fix once I pointed it out. This was a decision. A calculated one. They looked at that bridge and decided it was easier to use it than to respect it. The second truck rolled forward, and the entire structure let out a long, low creak, like it was warning me. Not them. Me. Because I knew exactly what would happen if they kept doing this. Not just cracks. Not just damage. Liability. Collapse risk. Insurance refusal. The kind of chain reaction that doesn't stop once it starts. I exhaled slowly, the smell of concrete burning the back of my throat, and pulled out my phone. I didn't wave my arms. I didn't yell. I didn't try to stop the truck. Because in that moment, I understood something very clearly. I didn't need to stop them. I just needed to let the right people see exactly what they were doing. And trust me, once they did, this wasn't going to cost them a warning. It was going to cost them everything they thought they were saving. I stood there for a long second after the last truck cleared the bridge, listening to the fading rumble echo through the trees, and then the silence came back in pieces, like the land itself was trying to reset after something it never agreed to. I turned and walked the length of the bridge slowly, one hand trailing along the rail, eyes scanning every joint, every bolt, every beam my father had ever tightened with his own wrench. There were fresh marks along the deck, gray streaks of dried concrete smeared into the grain of the wood, tire impressions pressed deeper than anything a pickup truck could leave behind, and right near the center span, I saw it. A hairline fracture along one of the support beams. Not wide, Not dramatic, but it did not belong there. I crouched down, fingers brushing over it, feeling the rough edge where the wood had started to split under stress it was never meant to carry. My father used to say, structures do not fail all at once. They whisper before they scream. That crack was a whisper. I straightened up, already doing the math in my head, load cycles, fatigue stress, cumulative damage, and the answer came faster than I wanted it to. If they kept this up, it was not a question of if. It was when. And when it happened, it would not just be my bridge. It would be whoever was on it. I pulled out my phone and started recording slow, steady footage of everything. The cracked beam, the worn planks, the missing bolt from the sign, the tracks leading in and out like a highway that had appeared overnight. Then I heard it again, another engine in the distance, and I did not even need to turn around to know what it was. I stepped off the bridge this time and waited at the entrance as the next cement truck rolled up, brakes hissing, the driver leaning slightly out the window like he had done this a dozen times already. You planning to stop or just roll right through? I said, keeping my voice level. He looked at me, confused for half a second, then shrugged. Dispatch told us this was the access route. Dispatch is wrong, I said. This is private property. That bridge is not rated for your load. He glanced at the sign, then back at me. Look, man, I just drive where they tell me. You got a problem, you need to call the site office. Of course. Always one layer removed. Always someone else's decision. I nodded once and stepped aside, not because I agreed, but because I already understood something he did not. Stopping him would not fix this. It would just delay it. The truck crawled forward, and I watched the suspension dip as it hit the first plank, the entire structure giving that same low groan like it was being asked to carry a secret it could not hold much longer. I waited until he was halfway across before I turned and started walking toward the tree line, following the temporary dirt path they had carved into the edge of my property. The ground was packed hard with tire tracks, wide enough now that it was no longer accidental. This was a route, a system, intentional. As I stepped through the trees, the noise grew louder, generators humming, voices carrying across the open space, and then the site came into full view. Framing crews, concrete forms, rebar stacked in bundles, and right in the center of it all, a white SUV parked like it belonged there more than anything else. I recognized it immediately. Laura Whitmore did not blend in. She stood near a group of contractors, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, posture straight like she was running a board meeting instead of a construction site. I walked straight toward her, boots crunching over gravel, and one of the foremen glanced at me like he already knew this was not going to be a friendly conversation. Laura turned just as I got close enough, her smile appearing fast, practiced, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Daniel, right? She said, like we were neighbors catching up over coffee. I was meaning to reach out. I stopped a few feet from her, close enough to see the reflection of the site in her sunglasses. You are running commercial traffic over a private bridge that has a 10,000-pound limit, I said. You removed part of the posted sign, and you are doing it without any legal access agreement. So let us skip the part where this is a misunderstanding. Her smile did not drop. It just shifted slightly, tighter at the corners. It is a temporary accommodation, she said. We are improving the area. This benefits everyone. I let that sit there for a second, the word everyone, hanging in the air like it included me when it clearly did not. That bridge fails, I said, and it is not just a repair bill. It is liability. It is injuries. It is lawsuits. And your insurance will not cover a structure you were never authorized to use. One of the contractors shifted his weight behind her. He understood. She either did not or chose not to. Laura tilted her head slightly, still calm, still controlled. We have engineers on this project, she said. Everything is within acceptable limits. I almost laughed, but I did not, because that was the moment it clicked fully into place. She was not ignoring the risk. She was betting on it not happening fast enough to matter. I took a slow breath, the smell of fresh concrete and cut lumber mixing in the air, and nodded once. You might want to have them take another look, I said. Then I turned and walked back the way I came, not rushing, not looking back, because the next steps were already lining up in my head with the kind of clarity that only comes when the problem is no longer a question. It is a process, and they had just given me everything I needed to start it. I did not go home right away. Instead, I sat in my truck at the edge of the gravel road, engine off, Windows cracked just enough to let the outside air bleed in, carrying that same mix of diesel and wet concrete that now felt like it had settled into my skin. I replayed the last 10 minutes in my head, every word Laura said, every look from the contractors behind her, and more importantly, everything she did not say. No denial, no hesitation, just confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from thinking you have already won. I reached over to the passenger seat and grabbed my field notebook, the same one I had been carrying for years, pages filled with load calculations, site sketches, quick notes from inspections. I flipped to a clean page and started writing, not because I needed to remember, but because writing it down made it official. Time, date, estimated vehicle weight, number of crossings observed, visible structural stress indicators. The pen scratched across. The paper in short, deliberate strokes, each line turning what I had just witnessed into something that could not be dismissed as opinion. Another truck passed in the distance, the low rumble traveling through the ground again, and I felt it in the steering wheel this time, a faint vibration that should not have been there. That was when I pulled out my phone and made the first call. County Building and Safety, this is Mark. His voice was calm, routine, like he had answered the same way 1,000 times. My name is Daniel Harper, I said. I need to report unauthorized commercial use of a private access structure with a posted load limit being exceeded by heavy construction vehicles. There is visible structural stress, and there is no recorded easement granting access. There was a brief pause on the other end, the kind where someone shifts from autopilot to paying attention. You said no easement? He asked. None, I said. And I have documentation. All right, he said, tone changing slightly. I am going to log this as a safety concern. We will need an inspector to verify. Can you provide location details? I gave him everything, coordinates, parcel number, nearest cross street, and when I hung up, I did not feel relief. I felt momentum, because that was just step one. The next call was to a colleague of mine, someone I trusted not because he would take my side, but because he would tell me the truth. Chris, it is Daniel, I said when he picked up. I need a second set of eyes on a bridge. He chuckled lightly. You always need a second set of eyes. What is going on? I described it all, the trucks, the load, the crack, the missing bolt from the sign. There was a longer silence this time. If what you are saying is accurate, he said finally, you are looking at accelerated fatigue failure, especially if that structure was never rated for repeated loads anywhere near that weight. That is what I thought, I said. You got pictures? More than pictures, I said. I have video. Then do not touch anything, he said. Do not reinforce it. Do not block it. Let it be exactly what it is right now. Because if this goes where I think it is going, the condition of that bridge is your strongest evidence. Evidence. That word settled differently than anything else that day. Not damage. Not conflict. Evidence. I ended the call and sat there for another minute, watching as yet another truck approached in the distance, slow and heavy, like it had all the time in the world. I did not move to stop it. I did not wave it down. Instead, I stepped out of the truck and walked back toward the bridge, phone already recording again, capturing the approach, the entry, the exact moment the front tires hit the first plank and the entire structure gave that now familiar groan. I zoomed in on the support beam, catching the slight flex that would be invisible to anyone who did not know what to look for. But I did, and so would anyone else who mattered. When the truck cleared, I stopped the recording and looked down at the bridge one more time, taking in every detail, every flaw that had not been there before this started. My father built this to last a lifetime under the conditions it was meant for. What they were doing was not just careless. It was calculated risk. And the thing about calculated risk is that it only works if nobody is keeping track. I slid my phone back into my pocket and took a slow breath, the air still carrying that sharp, chemical edge, and for the first time since I saw that first truck, I felt something settle into place. Not anger, not frustration, clarity, because I was not going to argue with them. I was not going to try to convince them. I was going to document them. Every load, every crossing, every violation. And when the right people looked at it, this was not going to be a disagreement. It was going to be a record. And records do not care about confidence. They care about facts. And I had just started collecting them. By the next morning, the sound started before the sun came up. A low diesel idle rolling through the quiet like it did not belong there, followed by the slow grind of heavy tires on gravel that had never been meant to carry that kind of weight. I was already awake. I had not really slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that bridge again, that deep, strained groan echoing like a warning I could not ignore. I stepped outside with a mug of coffee gone cold in my hand, the air sharp and cool, and watched as the first truck of the day lined up at the entrance. No hesitation, no pause, just routine, like they had done it enough times now that it felt normal. That was the part that stuck with me. Not the damage, not even the risk. It was how quickly something wrong becomes routine when nobody stops it. I set the mug down on the hood of my truck and pulled out my phone, recording again, capturing the timestamp, the license plate, the company logo on the side of the drum. The driver did not even look toward my house this time. He just rolled forward, the bridge answering him with that same low creak, louder now, longer. I could hear the difference. Anyone who worked with structures long enough could. That was not just load. That was fatigue building, layer by layer. By 8 o'clock, I had counted 9 crossings. 9. I wrote each one down, time, direction, estimated load, and by the 10th, I did not need to check my watch anymore. They were coming through every 12 to 15 minutes like clockwork. This was not temporary. This was a system. Around mid-morning, a white pickup pulled up near the bridge and parked just off the road. County logo on the door. The inspector stepped out, mid-50s, sun-worn face, clipboard already in hand. He walked toward me, eyes scanning the structure before he even said a word. "You the one who called this in?" he asked. "Daniel Harper," I said, offering a handshake. "That is me." He nodded once and stepped onto the bridge slowly, testing each plank with the kind of instinct you do not teach, you earn. I followed a few steps behind, watching his eyes move from the deck to the supports, to the sign, to the fracture I had found the day before. He crouched down near it, ran his fingers along the split, then looked back at me. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. "At least several days," I said. "Maybe longer. I caught it yesterday." He let out a slow breath through his nose and stood up, turning just as another truck approached in the distance. We both watched it for a second, the engine noise growing louder, the weight of it obvious even before it reached us. "You authorized this?" he asked without looking at me. "No," I said. "There is no easement, no agreement, nothing filed." He nodded again, this time slower. "All right," he said. "Let us see it." We stepped off the bridge and stood to the side as the truck rolled forward. I kept recording. He did not say anything while it crossed. He just watched. The flex in the structure was subtle, but it was there, a slight dip, a response that should not have been happening under normal conditions. When the truck cleared, he made a note on his clipboard, then another. "This is not rated for that," he said, more to himself than to me. "Not even close." "That is what I have been saying," I replied. He looked at the sign, tilted, one bolt missing, then back at the path leading toward the construction site. "They have been using this as primary access?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "All day. Every day." He was quiet for a moment, then flipped to a new page on his clipboard. "All right," he said. "Here is what is going to happen. I am filing an immediate safety concern. That triggers a formal review. If they do not have legal access and they are exceeding structural limits, this can shut their operations down until it is resolved." I felt that word land heavier than I expected. Shut down. Not argue. Not warn. Shut down. Another truck appeared in the distance, and this time, the inspector raised his hand slightly, signaling the driver to stop before reaching the bridge. The brakes hissed, and the engine idled, waiting. The driver leaned out the window. "What is going on?" he called out. The inspector stepped forward just enough to be heard. "County Building and Safety," he said, calm but firm. "This structure is under review. You are not authorized to cross until further notice." The driver looked confused, then glanced past him toward the site like he was waiting for someone else to override it. No one did. For the first time since this started, the bridge sat still. No weight, no vibration, just quiet. I stood there, listening to that silence settle in, and realized something that Laura Whitmore had not accounted for. Confidence works until it meets process, and process does not care how certain you are. It only cares what you can prove. And now, finally, someone else was looking at the same facts I had been seeing since the first truck crossed that line. The silence did not last long. About 20 minutes after the inspector stopped that last truck, I saw the white SUV again, moving faster this time, dust kicking up behind it as it pulled up near the bridge like it had somewhere urgent to be. Laura stepped out before the engine even fully settled, sunglasses on, phone already in her hand, her expression tighter than it had been the day before. She walked straight toward us, heels crunching against the gravel. That same controlled energy, but with an edge now, like something had interrupted her schedule and she did not appreciate it. "What is going on here?" she said, not really asking, more like demanding an explanation she felt entitled to. The inspector did not rush his response. He flipped a page on his clipboard, glanced down, then back up at her. "County Building and Safety," he said. "We received a report of unauthorized use of a private structure exceeding its load rating. I am placing a temporary halt on traffic over this bridge pending review." Laura let out a small breath through her nose. Almost a laugh, but without any humor in it. "That is not necessary," she said. "We have engineers on site. Everything is being handled." The inspector's expression did not change. "Do you have a recorded easement granting you access to this structure?" he asked. There it was. The question that mattered. Laura paused for half a second, just enough for someone paying attention to notice. "We have a working agreement," she said. "With who?" he asked. She glanced at me briefly, then back at him. "It is a temporary accommodation while we complete construction." The inspector nodded slowly, like he had heard that answer before in a dozen different forms. "That is not what I asked," he said. "Do you have a recorded easement filed with the county?" The air felt different in that moment. Quieter. Even the crew at the site seemed to slow down, like they could sense something shifting. Laura crossed her arms, adjusting her stance slightly. "We are improving infrastructure for this community," she said. "Delaying this project affects multiple homeowners." The inspector looked past her for a second, toward the line of trucks now idling in the distance, then back at her. "Safety is not optional," he said, "and neither is property law." She opened her mouth to respond, but he continued before she could. "Until you can provide documentation of legal access and structural certification that supports these loads, no commercial vehicles are permitted to cross this bridge." For the first time, her smile disappeared completely. Not dramatically, just gone, replaced by something flatter, colder. "This is going to cost us time," she said. "And money." The inspector closed his clipboard with a soft snap. "That is not my concern," he replied. "My concern is that this structure is being used in a way that could result in failure. And if that happens, it is not just your project that is affected." He let that hang there for a second, then added, "It is everyone involved." Laura turned slightly, looking back toward the site, then at the trucks, then finally at me. That look lasted a second longer than necessary. Not anger. Not yet. More like calculation. Like she was trying to figure out how much I had already set in motion. "Daniel," she said, voice softer now, but no less controlled. "We could have handled this without involving the county." I met her gaze, steady. "You could have asked," I said. "You did not." She nodded once, slow, like she was filing that away for later. "This is not over," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "It is not." The inspector stepped away then, making a call on his radio, confirming the temporary restriction, and within minutes, the first official notice was being prepared. Bright orange. Hard to miss. He walked back to the entrance of the bridge and posted it right beside the tilted sign, securing it with fresh bolts this time. Firm, level, impossible to ignore. Temporary structural restriction. No commercial traffic permitted. I watched as the paper flattened against the wood, the edges catching slightly in the breeze before settling still. Behind us, engines began to shut off one by one, the steady hum fading into an uneasy quiet. Work had stopped, not because someone argued louder, not because someone demanded it, but because the process had caught up to the decision they made when they chose to use something that was never theirs. Laura stood there for another moment, looking at the notice, then at the bridge, then back toward the site that now had no way to move forward the way they planned. And for the first time since this started, she did not have an answer ready. Because this was no longer about confidence. It was about consequences. And those were just beginning. By late afternoon, the site looked different. Not empty, not abandoned, but paused in a way that felt unnatural, like a machine that had been running too fast and suddenly lost power. Equipment sat where it had stopped, concrete forms half-filled, rebar casting long shadows across dirt that had not yet been settled. The air still carried that sharp mix of cement and dust, but without the constant movement, it hung heavier, like something unfinished. I stood near the bridge, watching the orange notice ripple slightly in the breeze. bright enough that no one could pretend they had not seen it. That was the thing about official warnings. They did not shout. They did not argue. They just existed, and once they did, everything had to adjust around them. Around 3 o'clock, another vehicle pulled up, not the white SUV this time, but a dark sedan with a company logo I recognized from past projects. Insurance. That did not take long. 2 men stepped out, both carrying folders, both looking toward the bridge before they even spoke to anyone. One of them walked straight toward me. "You Daniel Harper?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded once. "We were contacted regarding a potential liability exposure tied to this structure and the adjacent development." He glanced at the posted notice, then at the bridge itself. "Mind if we take a look?" "Go ahead," I said, stepping aside. They moved with purpose, not rushed, but focused, the way people do when they already understand the stakes. One of them crouched near the same fracture I had documented, running a small flashlight along the split, while the other took photos from multiple angles, including the sign, the missing bolt, the tire markings pressed into the wood. I could hear them speaking quietly to each other, technical language, measured, precise. "Repeated overload cycles," one said. "Clear violation of posted limit," the other replied. "No reinforcement. No temporary bracing." They were not speculating. They were confirming. A few minutes later, Laura arrived again, this time slower, like she already knew what she was walking into. She stepped out of the SUV and approached the group, her posture still controlled, but there was a tension in the way she held her shoulders now, something less certain than before. "Who authorized this inspection?" she asked. One of the men stood up, turning to face her. "We are here on behalf of the project's insurance carrier," he said. "We received a report of unauthorized use of a private structure with potential structural compromise." Laura exhaled slowly, adjusting her sunglasses. "We have engineers managing this project," she said again, repeating the same line, but it landed differently this time. The man nodded slightly. "That may be," he said. "But if this structure fails while being used for your operations, coverage could be denied based on unauthorized access and known risk conditions." That word again. Denied. It hung there longer than anything else that had been said all day. Laura's expression tightened, just slightly. "We are working to resolve access," she said. "This is temporary." The second man closed his folder with a soft snap. "Temporary does not eliminate liability," he replied. "It just limits how long you have before something happens." Silence settled over the group again, thicker this time, not from uncertainty, but from realization. Because this was no longer just about permits or complaints. This was about exposure. Financial, legal, reputational, the kind that spreads fast once it starts. I watched as Laura turned slightly, looking back toward the site, then at the line of idle trucks still waiting in the distance, then finally at the bridge. Her bridge, in her plan. My bridge, in reality. "What are you recommending?" she asked, her voice quieter now, more measured. The first man did not hesitate. "Immediate cessation of all heavy traffic over this structure," he said. "Independent structural assessment. And documented legal access before any further use." He paused for a second, then added, "Until then, any continued use increases your exposure significantly." Laura nodded once, slow, like she was processing more than she was willing to say out loud. She glanced at me briefly, then back at the men. "Understood," she said. It was the first time she had said anything that sounded like acceptance instead of control. The men gathered their things, took a few final photos, and walked back to their car without rushing, without needing to say anything else. They did not have to. The situation spoke for itself now. I stood there for another moment, listening to the quiet, noticing how different it felt compared to just 24 hours ago. No engines. No weight pressing down on something that was not built for it. Just stillness. And in that stillness, the shift was clear. This was no longer a shortcut they could quietly take. It was a risk that had been seen, documented, and now measured by people whose job was to calculate consequences. I looked at the bridge one more time, the grain of the wood, the steel brackets, the small fracture that had started all of this, and I realized something simple but important. They did not stop because I told them to. They stopped because the truth reached the people who make decisions based on risk, not convenience. And once that happened, everything else followed. The next morning did not start with noise. It started with absence. No engines. No diesel hum. No slow, grinding weight pressing across wood that was never meant to carry it. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels earned, not natural. I stepped outside just after sunrise, the air crisp, carrying only the faint scent of damp earth instead of concrete and exhaust. The bridge sat still, unchanged on the surface, but I knew better. Structures remember what they have been through. And so do people. I walked out to the midpoint again, boots echoing lightly against the planks, and crouched near the fracture. It had not spread overnight, but it had not disappeared either. Damage does not undo itself just because the pressure stops. It waits. And it tells a story if you know how to read it. Around 8 o'clock, another vehicle approached, slower this time, cautious. Not a truck, a sedan. County markings again. The same inspector stepped out, this time with a second person, younger, carrying a tablet and a measuring kit. They did not waste time. They began documenting everything in detail, measurements, photos, notes, their voices low and focused. Deflection here, the younger one said, pointing along the span. You see that? The inspector nodded. Yeah, that is from repeated load, not a single event. He glanced at me briefly. You did the right thing calling this in when you did. I did not answer right away. I just watched them work, precise, methodical, turning what I had felt and seen into numbers and records. That was how things became real in their world. Not just visible, verifiable. By mid-morning, word had spread, not through announcements or emails, but through movement, or the lack of it. Workers at the site stood in small groups, talking, pointing occasionally toward the bridge, toward the notice, toward the officials now moving back and forth with equipment. The line of trucks that had once been constant was gone. Not delayed. Gone. And then Laura arrived again. This time, she did not step out immediately. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment, hands on the wheel, looking straight ahead. When she finally opened the door, the movement was slower, more deliberate. She walked toward us without sunglasses this time, her expression clearer, less guarded, but heavier. What is the status? She asked, not directing it at anyone in particular. The inspector straightened up from where he had been checking the support beam. We are escalating this for formal review, he said. Preliminary findings indicate the structure has been subjected to loads beyond its rated capacity. Continued use would pose a risk. Laura nodded once, absorbing it. Can it be reinforced? She asked. The younger inspector glanced at the older one before answering. Maybe, he said, but not quickly, and not without proper engineering, permits, and approval. This is not something you patch overnight. She looked past them at the bridge, then at the site behind her, the halted work, the still equipment. We have deadlines, she said quietly. Contracts. The inspector closed his tablet. Then you need to find a legal access route that meets those requirements, he replied. Because this one does not. There was no edge in his voice. No confrontation. Just fact. And facts do not bend for deadlines. Laura exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping just slightly, like the weight of something had finally settled in a way she could not ignore. She turned toward me then, not with the sharp calculation from before, but with something closer to acknowledgement. Daniel, she said, I underestimated the situation. It was not an apology. Not exactly. But it was closer than anything she had said so far. I held her gaze for a second, then nodded once. It is not about me, I said. It is about the structure, and the risk you put on it. She looked back at the bridge again, and for the first time, I saw her not as someone managing a project, but as someone realizing the cost of a decision that seemed small when it was made. The inspectors finished their initial assessment and began packing up, their work for the day done, but the process far from over. As they walked back to their vehicle, the younger one glanced at the bridge one more time and said quietly, almost to himself, it held longer than it should have. The older inspector nodded. That is what happens when something is built right, he said. But even good work has limits. I stood there after they left, the quiet settling in again, and looked out over the property, the bridge, the halted site beyond. Nothing dramatic had happened. No collapse. No sudden failure. Just a line that had been crossed, and then finally recognized. And in that recognition, everything had changed. Because once something is seen clearly for what it is, you cannot go back to pretending it is something else. The next 48 hours did not bring noise back. They brought pressure. Not the kind you hear or feel under your feet, but the kind that builds in conversations, in emails, in rooms you are not even in. I could see it from the outside, the way people moved at the site, quicker but without direction, like they were trying to stay ahead of something they could not see yet. Temporary fencing went up near the access path, not to secure anything, but to redirect attention. A few smaller vehicles came and went, but nothing heavy, nothing that even came close to the bridge. It stayed untouched, almost respected now, like something they suddenly understood they should have never treated casually. Late that afternoon, a different kind of vehicle pulled in. Not county, not insurance. Legal. You can always tell by the way they step out. Not rushed, not uncertain, just deliberate. A man in a dark suit, sleeves rolled just enough to look practical without losing the image, walked toward the bridge with a folder tucked under his arm. He looked at the structure first, not at me, taking in the span, the supports, the posted notice, the fracture that was now part of the story whether anyone liked it or not. Then he turned. "Daniel Harper?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded once. "I represent the development group associated with the adjacent property," he said. "We would like to discuss a resolution." There it was. Not denial. Not argument. Resolution. I gestured slightly toward the bridge. "You can start by acknowledging what happened," I said. He did not flinch. "Our client acknowledges that access was utilized without formalized agreement," he replied. "We are prepared to address that." I watched him for a second, measuring tone, posture, the way he chose his words. Careful, controlled, but underneath it, urgency. Because this was no longer a minor issue. This had grown into something that touched permits, insurance, timelines, and now legal exposure. "Address it how?" I asked. He opened the folder and handed me a document. Preliminary terms. Compensation for structural assessment, full repair or replacement of the bridge to original or improved condition, formal access. Negotiations if and only if mutually agreed. It was thorough, thought out, and late. "You understand this does not undo the risk you already created?" I said. He nodded. "We do," he said. "That is why we are here now." I glanced back at the bridge, at the grain of the wood, the small fracture that had started this shift, then back at him. "And if I say no?" I asked. He did not hesitate. "Then the project will be required to secure alternate access," he said, "which will involve additional permits, land acquisition, and likely significant delay." He paused for a fraction of a second, then added, "At considerable cost." There it was. Not a threat, not even a warning, just reality, stated plainly. I handed the document back. "You should have considered that before the first truck crossed," I said. He accepted it without argument. "You are not wrong," he replied. That answer landed differently than anything Laura had said over the past 2 days. Because it was not defensive. It was factual. And facts do not try to protect pride. We stood there for a moment, the quiet stretching out between us, filled only by the distant sound of work that was no longer moving forward the way it was supposed to. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. I looked at the bridge again, then beyond it, at the property my father had left me, at the line that had been crossed so easily when it was convenient. "I want the structure assessed by an independent engineer," I said. "I want full documentation of the damage. And I want any future access to be based on written agreement, not assumption." He nodded as I spoke, not interrupting. "That is reasonable," he said. "We can proceed with that." Reasonable. That word carried more weight now than any argument ever could. Because this was not about winning. It was about correcting something that should have never happened in the first place. The man closed his folder, giving a small nod. "We will be in touch," he said, then turned and walked back toward his car, each step measured, already moving on to the next part of a problem that had become much bigger than a shortcut across a piece of land. I stayed where I was for a while after he left. The late afternoon light stretching shadows across the bridge, highlighting every line, every imperfection that now told a story no one could ignore. They had tried to save time, to save money, to move faster by stepping over something they did not own. And now, every step they took to fix it was going to cost more than if they had done it right from the beginning. Not because I stopped them, but because reality finally caught up with the decision they made when they thought no one was paying attention. The report came back 3 days later. Not as a phone call, not as a casual update, as a document. 32 pages, stamped, signed, and written in the kind of language that does not leave room for interpretation. I sat at the kitchen table with it spread out in front of me, The late afternoon light cutting across the pages, highlighting diagrams, stress calculations, photographs I had taken now turned into formal evidence. The conclusion was exactly what I expected, but seeing it written down made it heavier. Repeated overload beyond rated capacity. Structural fatigue confirmed. Immediate repair required. Continued use under prior conditions would have resulted in failure. Not might. Would. I ran my hand over the edge of the paper, feeling the texture of it, and for a second, I thought about my father standing on that same bridge years ago, tightening bolts, checking alignments, making sure everything was exactly how it needed to be. He built it right. They just used it wrong. Later that afternoon, I met with the same man in the suit again, this time not at the bridge, but at a small office space near the site that had been turned into a temporary meeting room. Laura was there too, seated across the table, no sunglasses, no clipboard, just a folder in front of her and a look that was quieter than anything I had seen from her before. The report sat between us. The man opened the meeting without wasting time. "We have reviewed the independent assessment," he said. "Our client accepts the findings." Laura nodded slightly, not speaking yet. "Based on the report," he continued, "we are prepared to fully fund the repair and reinforcement of the bridge to meet updated structural standards or complete replacement if required." He paused, then added, "Additionally, all costs associated with the assessment and any related delays will be covered." I looked at Laura then. She met my eyes, held them for a second, then spoke. "We should have handled this differently," she said. No performance, no polished tone, just a statement. "Yes," I replied. There was nothing else to add to that. The man slid another document across the table. Revised terms. Clear. Detailed. No assumptions this time. Everything written, everything defined. Access only with permission. Load limits specified. Liability outlined. It was the kind of agreement that should have existed before any truck ever touched that bridge. "Take your time reviewing it," he said. I glanced down at the pages, then back up. "I will," I said. "But understand this is not just about the structure." Laura nodded again, slower this time. "I know," she said, and I believed her. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. The room was quiet for a moment. Not tense, not uncomfortable, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after something has already shifted and there is nothing left to argue about. A week later, the work began again, but it looked different. No trucks crossed the bridge. Not one. Instead, a new access route was being carved out on the far side of the property, longer, more expensive, requiring permits and grading in time. The bridge was repaired under supervision, every step documented, every reinforcement measured. They did it right this time. Because now, they had to. I stood there one evening as the sun dropped behind the trees, watching the last of the light catch on the steel brackets my father had installed decades ago, now reinforced, stronger than before, but carrying the same shape, the same purpose. It was still his work, just tested in a way he never intended. Laura walked up beside me, stopping a few feet away, not too close, not too far. "It is a good structure," she said, looking out at it. "It always was," I replied. She nodded, hands resting at her sides. "We lost more time trying to take a shortcut than we would have if we had done it right from the start," she said quietly. I let that sit for a second, the words settling into something that felt less like regret and more like understanding. "That is usually how it works," I said. She gave a small nod, then turned and walked back toward the site, where things were moving again, but differently now, slower, more deliberate. I stayed where I was for a while longer, listening to the quiet, feeling the solid stillness under my feet. No vibration, no strain, just a structure doing exactly what it was meant to do. And that was the thing about all of this. It was never about stopping anyone. It was about making sure that what was built, what was owned, what was trusted, was respected. Because once that line gets ignored, it is not just property that is at risk. It is everything that stands on it. And some lines are not meant to be crossed, no matter how convenient it seems in the moment.